Tobin, who will talk to us for the next 45 to 60 minutes around mental health in the workplace. So Liz has got over 20 years experience in mental health and wellbeing, a highly skilled facilitator, and also is a registered occupational therapist. So Liz will be talking a little bit today around looking after your own mental health during the COVID-19 workplace restrictions, community restrictions, changing social interactions, certainly changing restrictions and requirements in a workplace, and also examine some of the risks.
I've just lost Mark. Can anyone else? Can you all hear me, Simone? Am I still on? I'm still on. Would you like me to just jump in? Someone give me a thumbs up if you'd like me to jump in. Okay, I was worried it was me. It's my new fear since COVID started. Okay, well, I'll jump in. This is one of our whole new things, isn't it? Constant little hiccups. So thank you, Mark, for that introduction. It's absolutely lovely to be here today. It'll be lovely to see all your faces, but we'll work with what we've got. So I am really conscious that at this moment in time, all of you will have a story. You will have either loss, grief, limitations, frustrations of some kind, and that's because of COVID. And then under that, secondary to that, we've got our normal lives, our normal stresses of family life, finances, work. So this year has really presented a double barrel to everyone, wherever you are and whatever your circumstances is. So I really wanted to acknowledge that up front. I really want to acknowledge that many of you will have a great understanding of mental health through your own experiences, through people you love, sadly, possibly through people you've lost. And so I want to acknowledge that from the outset, because sometimes when I'm talking about the norms and the benchmarks, it can feel a little bit clinical. And I really want to make that clear at the beginning that by no means is that my intention. I want you all to be able to take something away from this. For some of you, it might be a refresher of things you already know, or for some of you, it might be a new platform to start thinking about things. My background is in workplace mental health, but of course our workplace is flooding to our lives, and more so than ever. I'm sitting in Melbourne, yay, lucky me. Sorry for all the Melbourne people on the call. And I've got like 3 kids literally hidden behind that door, homeschooling and a husband. So I apologise in advance if they interrupt at all. They've all gotten pretty good at staying away from me when I'm in work mode. So the other thing I want to mention before we get started, because you are a big group and I don't know your stories, if anything that I say today resonates with you or triggers you, please just take a moment, go and have a tea or a coffee or walk away. We don't know our triggers sometimes. They can be really unexpected. So when I start talking about these things, it may bring something unexpected up for you. So I want to just put that out there at the start as well. So what we'll be covering today is looking at just a really general understanding of mental health. And I really want us to look at the common signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, because mental health is messy, it's complex, and it can be really, really sneaky. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at these signs and symptoms. They're not very different to things that we've all experienced over our lifetime. We'll look at some of the things that you can be doing to look after yourself at COVID, depending on where you are at the world and where your family is. There are always things we can be doing better for our well-being. So we'll talk a bit about that. And towards the end, we'll talk briefly about how you can support anyone else that you might be concerned about at the moment, because that's also really important. So I also just have this little slide here, which I think is a nice simple one to remind us that our mental health isn't static. So if at the moment you're having a crappy day, it doesn't mean tomorrow is going to be crappy, or later in the day is not going to be crappy. My guess is Mark might be feeling a bit stressed at the moment with his lack of sound. In an hour, that will have changed. So our mental health moves up and down over the day, over the weeks. The issue comes when we get stuck in that red pointy part. So if we're in this red pointy part for a prolonged period of time and it's impacting our function, that's when we know we need to start having conversations to get help to shift us back. The ultimate has been in that green, which looks about as beautiful as the course I can see in the background of Peter's, where life is good, and that green is our optimum well-being. So that's just this idea that it just keeps moving. And that's really important if you are having a tough time or supporting someone who's having a tough time. So this will change. You will not stay in this space or this mindset forever. And we like to think of that at the moment, particularly with COVID. It will change. Like, yeah, when? But it will, right? So there's some stats here. I'm not going to spend too much time on the stats. These are from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, for those of you who aren't in Australia. But worldwide, they are fairly similar across most of the places that you would be. But what we see when we look at these stats, I think, is a really stark reminder that mental health is really common. And all of you will either know someone very closely or have experienced yourself over your lifetime. So that's really why I want to pop those stats up there. Now, I forgot to mention before that as we're going, what I'd really love you to do, if you have any questions or queries, please put them in the chat. I'll be pausing at 2 points throughout for you to ask questions, but it can be really nice to add a little bit more energy and interest, not just for yourself, but also for your colleagues in this forum, of just using that chat. Go crazy on the chat if you'd like to. At this point, just tell me you can hear me and you can see me okay. Just 2 or 3 people, so I know the chat's working. I got some thumbs up. Beautiful. Let's keep going. Ace. So what's depression? Look, the easiest way for me to tell you what depression is, it is more than just feeling sad. Because we've used depression to death, that word, like I am so depressed, on stage for an hour of exercise. That is, I am frustrated, I am fed up, I am completely over this. It's more this really deep sadness that someone feels that doesn't shift quickly or easily. And it's often described by people who are unwell as feeling really hopeless or feeling really helpless. And that lasts for 2 weeks or more. Clinically, over the years, one thing that's come up again and again with people I've worked with is them describing that everything feels heavy and it feels grey. So they feel like they're wearing clay boots. And that's an awful way for people to be feeling. And it can often be like, well, of course I feel like that at the moment because blah, blah, blah. But we shouldn't have that level of heaviness day in, day out. And that's, I suppose, the hallmark, is this feeling of just a real sadness more often than not. So some of the really common signs and symptoms that we see here, and I think I said before, depression is sneaky, because you'll look at this list that I've just popped up and you're like, well, yeah, I feel tired. If you've got young children, you'll feel tired maybe for 5 years. I'm sorry to tell you, maybe 10 if they're bad sleepers. So we look at these symptoms and we go, yeah, no, I've experienced that. I've experienced that. Yeah, the feelings. I often feel unhappy. I can feel quite overwhelmed at the moment, particularly I watch the news. I can feel quite irritable. Our changes in thinking. This is a real hallmark here, this sense of worthlessness, of I'm not enough, everything I do is wrong. So if that's your internal talk, that's a real, I suppose, a flag to say this isn't okay. And what we often see of people who are unwell, these are probably more evident in the workplace if we're trying to look out and look after each other, is changes in someone's behaviours. So we might see that they're not getting things done in the way they normally would, or the quality that they normally would get them done. They're not interacting. The banter that they may engage in isn't there. The other behaviour change that is often associated with depression, unfortunately, is a heavy reliance on alcohol and drugs. And we see this particularly in our male population, and particularly younger guys, as a way of self-medicating. And it is kind of being taught through our culture of like having a tough time, having a bad day, have a drink, go to the pub, let's catch up and it'll be okay. The problem here is pretty obvious. What it does is it increases those symptoms and it increases those negative feelings. It's a real short-lived band-aid that exacerbates the problem. So is there anything that people wanted to add to this list? This is not exhaustive, this list, and this list can be found on the Beyond Blue website, and there's also a checklist there that can be a really nice thing to go through for an individual or for a family member or a close friend, if things like, not sleeping, feeling irritable, and it will help direct whether that person needs to speak to a doctor or not. So if it's something it's something worth having a look at while this is fresh in your mind today. So I love putting pictures in. So I've stuck this picture in at the last minute. Some of you will recognise this. Do any of you recognise it? Mick Fanning, Shark 2018. I love this picture because looking at this picture makes me feel stressed. And we're going to talk about anxiety now, but before I wanted to talk about anxiety, I wanted to acknowledge stress. So a little bit of stress is fantastic. In this situation for Mick Fanning, stress is what probably saved his life. If he didn't have a stress reaction and it's not rational, it's not problem solved, it's not thought out, it's just like, oh my God, there's a shark, punch, swim, run, get the hell out of there. And this is what our stress response has been designed to do. So if we wound back 2 million years, this is what the stress was doing. It was keeping us safe. And it still keeps us safe, and that's what it's there to do. But the problem is we're often seeing sharks in the shadows when there's not a shark. It's a deadline, or it's an email, or it's something going on at home, but our body still goes into this fight and flight. Do I fight? Do I get out of here? So when we have this happening in our everyday life in a disproportionate way, then we start to sneak across and become more at risk of stress impacting and increasing our risk of anxiety. So what's happening for the brain in that stress moment is all our rational thinking, it's gone. We don't have time for rational thinking when a shark is about to munch on our feet. So what happens is the central nervous system takes over, and this is why when we're stressed we get hot and our heart goes faster and we feel really uneasy and the adrenaline just fires out of us. Fantastic, as I said, if there's a shark. Not so great if it's a deadline. Not so great if every time you read the stats on COVID or you look at the world news, you start to have those feelings. This is where it impacts on our ability to function and our quality of life. And this is why this prolonged stress response really increases our risk of anxiety. So a bit of stress, as I said, is great. It helps us perform. It helps us get out of bed, be good at what you all do every day, overcome little hiccups and problems that are presented each day while you're at work. But that's where it needs to end. So when we've been having responses that are disproportionate to the situation, it's starting to move from stress to anxiety. And the problem at the moment we're seeing is a huge increase in anxiety. I mean, Beyond Blue report having, I think they said, a 40% increase in calls, predominantly around anxiety, just because of COVID. One thing that I find really fascinating at the moment is anxiety is based on irrational fears. So that definition has served us very, very well for a long time. But I feel at the moment that definition is really being tested because there is a lot of unknowns that have been presented in our lives, in our work lives, with changes in work practice, with changes in household interactions and relationships and travel overseas, that our irrational fears can no longer be switched to rational as easily as they could have pre-COVID. Is there any comments around that? Anyone agreeing or want to disagree? Give me a nod if you're still there. You haven't all snuck off for an extra coffee. I would never do that. The other thing with anxiety, it really impacts on someone's quality of life. It really stops you being able to function in the way that you normally would. One of the most common things about anxiety, which is really quite interesting when we think back to that adrenaline, is muscle pain, headaches. It's often the first thing that people present at the doctor with is saying, I'm having terrible, terrible headaches. I can't sleep at night. And this is because there's just too much cortisol from that adrenaline in their system that's just staying high. It's not dropping down. It's not allowing the other chemicals to kick in. So when people are experiencing anxiety, they're often feeling really on edge. And we can all relate to that. We've all had moments of feeling like that, but it's when it's on an ongoing basis and impacting. One of the things with anxiety is this real feeling of dread that something really bad is going to happen. And I think COVID has provided that form for a lot of people who are already experiencing anxiety. It has increased. And that's definitely what we're seeing, because things that they were worried about have just gotten bigger. Their impact has gotten bigger. So this panic this fear is sitting with them all the time, and that inability to disconnect from it and shut the doors and ignore it has gotten harder for a lot of people, and for a lot of reasons that are often understandable at the moment. The other thing that we see with anxiety is thinking. So where people really are very, very hard on themselves. There's a lot of lovely videos on Beyond Blue's website around people talking about their experience with anxiety and their perception of, I'm failing. Oh, the boss wants to speak to me. I must have stuffed everything up. No, the boss just wanted to check what's going on and whether you can do a shift on the weekend. But the brain, which is hardwired to be looking out for the sharks and the negative, just stays in that mindset. And that's very exhausting for people when they're feeling like that all the time, this intrusive negative thinking. The other thing we see a lot is behavioural avoidance. So if you're scared of something, you stay away from it. And that's what we often, as far as signs and symptoms in workplaces, will be the avoidance. It mightn't be the avoidance of coming to work altogether, but it might be avoidance of particular tasks. And all of you would have a much better idea what those might be. And if you've been in your industry for a long time and we had more time, you would probably be able to tell me examples of what you've seen over the years where people start to avoid different tasks for no real reason when they used to be able to do them fine, but they've created some fear around that. So if you want to add anything to the chat on that, examples, that would be great as well, because you know your industry a lot better than I do. Is there any questions on these signs and symptoms before I move on? So now I'm going to get you to take a minute. There's lots of reasons why people will experience depression or anxiety or just feel overwhelmed, particularly at the moment. I want you to take a minute. If you've got a pen, if you're in a shed with a few other people, have a discussion rather than pen, about thinking about what are 3 to 5 different risks that impact on mental health. That can be personal or it can be just general things. And I also want you to take a minute to think about the protective factors. Now, as I said before, if you're not by yourself and you're with some colleagues, spend 2 minutes chatting about this. If you are by yourself, have a scribble on a piece of paper. And then I'm really hopeful that someone will put something in the chat, a few risks, so that we can get it really thinking in a very specific way about your industry here as well. I'd love to see 1 or 2 risks that you think are really relevant to your industry at the moment. Great. And if you don't want to chat, if you want to butt in, please butt in as well. You can take yourself off mute and yell something out if you're more of a talker. Now, the chat hasn't come up on my screen. Is there anything in the chat coming through? Nothing? Still?
No.
You're all hopeless. Has anyone told you you're all hopeless? That's okay. I'm going to be really kind because I've been in lockdown for years now. So, whatever, right? Does anyone want to share with me one of the risks that you think is really relevant to your people at the moment? No?
Yeah,
That's fine as well.
One here, Liz, starting times and doing a good job.
Fantastic. That was one of the things I was going to anticipate. Thank you, whoever shared that. You should get the prize for the day. Do other people agree with that that's kind of one of the increased risks? It's around change in practices of work. Is that what you're alluding to there? That different demands, yeah. And the thing, when we have changes in our work practices, it also changes our family life. It changes our access to leisure, to social life, to gym. It has a real snowball effect. So, so thank you for those shares.
There's another one here, Liz, family relationships.
Absolutely. This comes up probably as our number 1 risk, is the family relationships. It is consistently pre-COVID and currently as well, and consistently comes up as the number 1 risk. So when things aren't right there, or someone is unwell, or there is stress at home, that has a profound impact on our mental health. So if you're someone at the moment supporting other people, just be really aware of your own mental health and the toll that that is possibly taking on yourself, not just others, and be aware of that. So it's a really, really, really big one. The other ones that come up are always financial, home environments, if they're not stable, if they're not safe. I think there's another one that just came up there as well. That's great. I can't quite see that one. Was there one more there?
One here that, Liz, that people are saying that a lot of supers often take all the responsibility on themselves and don't share or delegate.
Okay, so that's a really interesting one, that over time you're the holder of everything that's going on for people, and possibly becomes less sustainable the longer you hold everything. So that's about going back and looking at systems and giving yourself permission to delegate. It's probably the protective factor on the other side. Would that be fair to say? Yeah. A tricky one though, when you think, oh, it won't be done if I don't do it. And I think we can all relate to that. So the protective factors, the things that come up, are often the same: family and close relationships. That includes pets, that includes neighbours, loved ones, is our biggest protective factor consistently, no matter what's going on. The other that comes under that, of course, is finance and is work stability. And having supports at work is a really critical thing here. So having people that you can talk to, that you can debrief, that you can problem solve with, and that you can just feel a bit of sense of camaraderie with, that you're all part of the same tribe and all on the same page. So thank you all very much for engaging and doing those things. I appreciate it. Is there anything else that's all good?
There's a couple here. I think you've covered staff dynamics and loss of employment, bullying, and there's one here, actually catching COVID.
Great. Absolutely. And I think all those three at the moment are higher, possibly, than they've ever been, for lots of reasons. Well, COVID is unique. We didn't have that beforehand. And the implications on that are huge for a lot of families and a lot of communities. So, yeah, great. So thank you for those who chatted, all 8 of you. It's popped up now. Now that I'm done, it's popped up. Actually, it's gone to 9. So thank you all very, very much. Because I said, you guys know your industry, you know the pitfalls of it, and you also know the protective factor of it a lot better than myself coming in and saying, this and that. So it's really, this could almost just be the start of a conversation for a lot of you. It is a nice exercise to go back and do with your teams and go, hang on, let's just brainstorm a bit more. What's really impacting us at the moment? What are we doing well? And what else do we need to be doing to keep supporting each other on an ongoing basis? So, great, thank you. So I'll move past that. Now I wanted to talk about looking after yourself. So we've identified that mental health is really common, that 1 in 5 people will experience that. There's really common signs and symptoms around this. And I think one of the biggest things with mental health is people will often wait till they're very unwell before they realise they're unwell, or before they seek help. So it's about having lots of steps in place so we become more aware of our triggers, or that we might be becoming unwell, and as we go along here. This is just a nice overview here, a bit of a summary of different things, of the key areas that I want to talk about around staying well. So this first one I think is really important: stay connected. We have positive mental mindset, sleep, setting boundaries, and physical health. So I'm just going to go through and give some, I suppose, evidence-based tips and suggestions on all of these. That said, this is also a really nice time for you to go, okay, what am I doing well at the moment? Am I doing what I normally do to stay well, or have those things shifted and not been accessible to me? So how do I start to reflect on what I need to be doing? So rather than this being an information bomb, I want you to be thinking about how this really relates to you and your colleagues and friends and family. So I think the biggest one, because of COVID, is staying connected. You know, I know that people have family interstate that they can't see, or things like that, or even in Victoria we have them 5Ks up the road and we can't see them. So really looking at ways to stay and be connected. Likewise with your colleagues, because of some of the changing work practices, you may not be overlapping as much, you may not be spending as much time in lunchrooms or Friday night drinks or whatever it might be, finding ways to still have those connections with each other. And I must admit, at the start of this whole COVID thing, when my girlfriend's like, let's do Zoom drinks, I'm like, oh, let's not. I've been sitting at a computer all day. But as time's gone on, I love it. It's lovely and it's fun. And so finding some ways, it's not as good as being face-to-face. There's no doubt about it. Nothing beats sitting in a nice restaurant with some good friends. But, you know, pulling from what you've got at the moment can be a really nice thing to do. So any tips at this point? Let the chat go. If you've got things that you've found have been really good during this time, please just add them. Our physical health and our mental health has always been a really important partnership and are really interlinked. There were studies done a couple of years ago that looked at particularly depression and physical health, and what they found is that people who were unwell of depression, mild or moderate depression, who did physical activity on 3 times a week, and it was with groups, they had the same success as those who were taking a mild antidepressant. Now, this is what it really showed, is that relationship between the two is really strong. So when we are engaged in physical health, what we know is happening is the endorphins start popping out, and the serotonin and the dopamine and all these things that are really a natural kick-off to the depression along the way. So what is recommended across the board is just doing 30 minutes a day. Now, a lot of you have very active jobs, so that's kind of ingrained. You're lucky. For those who are more restricted at the moment, or your family may be constricted at the moment, or friends, there's a few tips there on different things you can do from home. The other thing around physical health is our food. And if you're particularly interested in this, I would encourage you to look at this website, the Food and Mood Centre. I'm not a naturopath or a nutritionist. I love my food, but I would say this website is great. They're doing lots of studies around the relationship with the mental health and what we're eating. They're also doing some really interesting studies around dementia and food. So I would encourage you to have a look at that if food's something that you're interested in finding out more around that relationship, around good gut health. The other thing here, it sounds so simple, is drink lots of water. And I laugh that I even put this in a slide, but I've popped it in there because recently I did some training and coaching of about 50 odd people, and all of them came up that they weren't drinking enough water. And I'm like, really? That is like the simplest thing you can do for your well-being. So make sure that's something that you are doing, and being outdoors, which is easy if you're in some of those beautiful settings. I can see there for some of you. The other thing I want to talk about around our mental health is a really strong relationship with sleep. So when we sleep, we start to kind of do a bit of brain recovery, filing of the brain. Our cortisol levels have to come down, those stress levels have to come down for our melatonin to kick in, and that's the hormone that helps us get to sleep. We need on average 7 to 9 hours of sleep on an ongoing basis. If you're not getting that, I want you just to make a mental note how much sleep you're getting. If you're in a group, share it with each other. If you're someone who's just said 4 every night, that's not going to be enough to sustain you on an ongoing basis. If you're someone who has a new baby, I'm really sorry. I'm not sure what tips I can give you except for cat nap whenever you can if you've got small people in the house. So some of the tips that have been found here is to going to bed at the same time every day and waking up at the same time. The other really big thing around sleep, and I suppose it's new in our research over the last 5 years, is disconnecting from devices at least 1 hour. I was laughing last night because I was doing some online shopping at about 9:30 at night, but what's popping up now on the screens are these blue light glasses. And I'm like, no, because the blue light is what keeps us feeling alert and stops the melatonin from being released. But It's also our cognitive overload that's going on. So it's not just the blue light. Don't buy the glasses. I've resisted, even though I'm like, oh, they look pretty good. You don't need the glasses. You need to get off the device at least an hour before you go to bed. And then you need to put that device out of your bedroom so it doesn't interrupt you in any way through the night. Reducing alcohol intake and coffee, obviously. For some people, they'll go, nah, doesn't worry me. But for most of us, we'll find that that will impact on our sleep. The other tip here is make sure your room is cool, quiet and dark. We know when people, if they've got anxiety, sleep and anxiety are a terrible mix because that cortisol is high and they're worrying. So at 3 a.m, this will be the time that they'll wake up. Anyone can, we've all experienced this at different moments, but when that is happening, more often than not, not one or two nights, but night after night, my tip would be to definitely try some of these things, but probably also speak to your GP or a health professional about why aren't I sleeping and why am I worrying, because that might be one of the flags to say that all this other stuff is going on, and it may be the start of kind of correcting it rather than just putting up with it, because people will put up with poor sleep for years and say that's just how I am, but it can often be an underlying anxiety or a symptom of depression. You know, in the still of the night, everything is it's a lot worse. Our thoughts are a lot more negative in the still of the night, and we do tend to exacerbate and exaggerate. So this is a really important component here. The other one, which I think most of us as a work in progress, is to say no, set boundaries for yourself, work out where your limitations are and try and hold off on them. The biggest one is responding to emails and texts, and doing that, it pairs really nicely with the sleep one. The other thing I'd say at the moment is choose what newsreels you find really helpful and try and look at them just once a day, not 25 times a day, because we can get really hooked. Again, I mean, the news is designed to hook us. It's designed to go, oh, negative, fear, what do I need to know? And we can very easily spend a disproportionate amount of time looking at these things that actually don't make us feel terribly good, that make us feel pretty lousy quite often. So being aware of that, just now if you've got doing a little scribble pad or with people to chat, just scribble down how much time you're spending, or think about it over the next few days, how much time am I spending on social media or news, and could I halve that? Some of you might be great, and I'm jealous of you going, I'll look at it 5 minutes and I'm done. But I think a lot of people at the moment are probably spending more time because there's a lot going on. Any questions or chats on that? No? The next one here, and this is probably one of my favourite ones, is around positive mindset. So the idea of positive mindset is, despite all the chaos, all the overwhelming feelings that people can be experiencing, there's a component of our brain that we can kind of tap into to decrease that cortisol, increase that calm, and shift where we're at. When we do these on an ongoing basis, they have the best effects. So meditation, there's lots been documented about meditation in the last kind of 5 or 10 years, and its close relationship and positive relationship with mental health as a bit of a circuit breaker. If you think of all those signs and symptoms that I was talking about, feeling down, feeling negative, feeling overwhelmed, hopeless, helpless, this is the circuit breaker. I've listed there some apps. The 3 apps I've listed there is because they're all free. There's about 1 billion apps out there, but these ones are free, so you can just download them on your phone. If you've never done any of these before, I'd say just have a try, have a play around. What you'll find is there'll be different ones that resonate and different ones that grate. I find there's some people's voices, I'm like, I can never relax listening to you. People probably think that about my voice. And that's good, because you're not meant to fall asleep in this session if you were just thinking that. So have a play around with them if you haven't done them, because they're a really lovely, really simple thing to add to your wellbeing toolbox. So likewise with mindfulness. Mindfulness is a super fancy word that's become very popular for just being present in the moment, just enjoying what's here, not worrying about what happened yesterday, which is a real symptom of depression, and not worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow, which is really linked with our anxiety. So if we can just go, I'm just going to be here right now and enjoy the sounds, the sights, the good coffee that I'm drinking, that really helps our mindset. The other things there are gratitude, laughter, and music. Look, laughter is probably my favourite one on that list as well, but sometimes we have to be taken out of ourselves to engage in these things. So thinking about how you can incorporate, not all, but one of these between your colleagues or your friends or your family, and if you're already doing that, well, that's awesome. So just keep on doing that. And I think laughter is a really nice one with colleagues. Got to pick the right colleagues and the right jokes, but for the most, we all are keen to respond to that. Any questions or shares there? Okay, I've got something's popped up there. Can you tell me what that one was, Simone? Is that a new chat from someone? Yeah. Thank you. No, great. Oh, I got really excited then.
No, it isn't. Sorry, it is a new one. It's just the same person. With the course closed in Melbourne, at the moment we have been using speakers on the course with music, and it's been really great for the guys. So that's a fantastic.
Oh, I love that tip. I'm going to pinch that tip. And it's funny how music can shift you from going to. So thank you for sharing that tip, and for all of you, that's a really nice one to take back to your teams, I think. That's great. The next thing before we move, I wanted to talk about was supporting each other. I think this is so important because when we look at mental health, one of the biggest barriers to people getting help early, where they get the best results, is actually being aware that they're unwell, because these signs and symptoms mask so much with busy, stressful lives. People will not realise their own changes in behaviour, their own narkiness, their own avoidance, until they're really at a pointy end quite often. So this piece here is really critical and really doable often in workplaces where you're seeing people in quite a habitual way all the time. You get to know, what music they like. You get to know how they drink their coffee, how they work, how do they function. So we're really well placed to look at and look after each other, I think. So one of the key things I want to say is you can think of all those symptoms, you can look at the checklist, but when in doubt, just look for changes in someone's behaviour. That's going to be your best indicator that something's going on for them. This isn't an equation for, changes in behaviour, definitely, depression or anxiety. It is a flag to say, wow, something's going on for them. They're having a tough time. They're a bit stressed at the moment. And that is your prompt to say, I better check if they're going okay. The other thing I'd say is your gut. Our gut is so clever. It's much more clever than our brain, I think. So follow it. Sometimes you'll have an interaction with someone and they walk off and you'll just think, that was weird. That was odd. Or a phone call or even an email, you think, just check. Always, always check. We're never going to do the wrong thing by checking too much. If someone's going okay, they're not always going to go, thank you for asking, you're the best thing ever. They're often going to go, particularly I imagine in your industry, yeah, nah, I'm fine. But you have planted that seed, you've thrown out that, started that conversation if they do want to respond. And that's really, really important. So these are two of my really big tips under this. If you want more information around this area, I would strongly suggest having a look at Are You OK? Look, this website simplifies it. You can overanalyse, overthink, and also really over-worry about, I'm going to do the wrong thing, I'm going to make it worse, I'm going to upset them, they're not going to want to work with me, I'm going to burst into tears. Don't worry about it. Your job is really just to ask, are you going okay? If they say no, it's saying, all right, what do we need? What can I do to help you? There might be something really practical that you can do to assist someone. They might blindside you and take you to that red pointy end. And in that case, how amazingly good that you have asked them how they're going if they're really at the pointy end of struggling. The tips around that very pointy end, I'd say, is probably contact, I'd say, Simone or HR or another manager and share that burden straight away, and also ensure that person is directly connected with their doctor or their partner or a health professional so that they get the help that they need. You want to pass that baton on so that they really get held during that time of crisis. So if you think of that arrow at the beginning again, the time of crisis for most people will shift. So it's about holding people safe during that time, getting them the resources that they need. And I've got some resources around that at the end here. And I think that's really important. And the other thing is I think I said we are often blindsided by this. It's often not the conversation you're expecting to have or with the person that you're expecting to have, but we all have kind of a bit of a role to play, I think, in that really pointy end of looking out and looking after each other. So is there any questions around that? So I'm going to just click to the next one. So this leads us on to supports. Before I lead into supports, I want you to flick back and think, just write down any notes, take a minute, things you need to be doing, I suppose, to look after yourself at the moment. Write them down, commit them to yourself. If you're already doing a brilliant job, A, I'm really jealous of you, but B, keep doing those things. So the key supports here, Beyond Blue has set up a specific telephone line for people impacted by COVID, and that's for Australian residents. So if you're outside of Australia, you should still be able to access that, I think. If not, go through the website and check. They also have forums at the moment, discussion forums and online chats, which can also be really nice if you don't want to get on a phone, but you just want to jump on and have a look and hear what people are saying and what people are doing. I think those online forums can be really interesting, and they're for anyone. So if you're thinking, look, I'm fine, but I'm really worried about my colleague, I'm really worried about someone in my team, or I'm really worried about my mate because we normally catch up once a week and he's going through a divorce and I haven't seen him, these resources are there for everyone. The other one is Lifeline. And I think that goes without saying its usefulness there. Again, have these phone numbers handy, which is easy. Well, we've all got phones and we're kind of attached to them like an IV. In really extreme circumstances, call 000. Don't think twice, don't mull over it, don't iffen up. The police will very happily take on board your concerns and go and check that someone is okay and do a health check for that person. Some other supports here that I think are particularly good, and these are really just about if you're wanting more resources, more information, and there is an overload and sometimes can be a bit turning off, is Beyond Blue, of course, but the Black Dog Institute have some really nice resources, some short videos. I've mentioned Are You OK? The Beyond Blue Personal Best, just for wellbeing tips, has some really fantastic stuff, as does taking care of yourself and staying well. So these, if you're scribbling at the moment, don't, because you can get these. I've given this PowerPoint to Simone and you can get a copy of them. And what I suggest people do is have these somewhere, if you haven't already, in your lunchrooms or your team rooms, so that when people are having a tough time, they can really easily access support. The other thing is you can always access Simone, always use each other as well. The best support often comes from each other in a big industry like you've got, where people understand and people get the challenges that you're all and the pressures that you're all under. And that brings me to the end of the content that I was wanting to cover. And now it's just if anyone had any questions or any comments.
Liz, just while we're waiting for some questions to come through, one of the things that's come up in the chat is about privacy, and when somebody does confide in you or something, what are your responsibilities to their private?
Really good question. So there's two components to this. If it's to a senior person, that senior person is representing the organisation. It depends on what they're sharing. So if they're sharing something like, I'm having a tough time and I'm going through a divorce and I hate everyone, and they're not really asking for any support, and it's like, okay, thanks for sharing, I'll look out and look after you. It can stop there, but if you are a senior person, you do have a responsibility if you're going to make any changes to their work practice or bring any supports in, to share it with HR. And that's, you need to say to the person, look, thank you so much for letting me know. I'm just going to put a note so I can check in with you. I'm going to check in with HR to make sure there's no other supports that we can get for you, or anything else that we can help you with at this moment in time. that's where you go. If the person said to, whether it was a colleague or a people leader, I'm feeling rotten, I'm going to go and throw a brick through my neighbour who is driving me crazy, brick through their window and tell them what I think, and then I'm just going to, go off and drink the rest of the day. And your gut barometer goes, boom, 10 out of 10. The privacy policies there that protect people, they go out the window. So if you think that someone is at risk to themselves or to someone else, you go straight to senior management and you say, I'm worried about Joe Bloggs. Basically, so everyone can look after Joe Bloggs and the neighbour who's going to get a brick thrown through their window. So it's assessing risk. If there is minimal risk, you just respect the person's privacy. If that risk starts to become even murky, privacy policies go out the door, basically. And it's a real case-by-case scenario. The other tip I would say to people is, when in doubt, have a conversation with more than one, share that burden internally, like with yourself, Simone, or with another senior manager, without divulging the person, but saying, I'm not sure what to do in this situation, rather than try and figure it out by yourself. Because some of these, I'm making it sound neat, it's A or B, but the grey in between can be pretty murky and pretty hard. So case by case, check in what in a confidential way. When do I need to become concerned? But if someone is at risk of hurting themselves or someone else, there's no doubt about it. You breach privacy, basically, and that will never be questioned. And you document it as you would anything, saying, this is my risk assessment and my rationale for action. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. We've got a few more coming through the chat.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you can see them and want to.
They're moving now. Did you want to pick one or two out that may? I'm just going to click here. Yep. Yeah, I've just read this one from Ali, that a lot of men just think anxiety is the norm and they have to get over it. And I think this is our biggest challenge, and it's definitely our biggest challenge when we look at our stats, and unfortunately our rates of people passing away by suicide, we need to keep reducing stigma. And conversations like today are reducing stigma, and take it back to your teams and keep talking and keep talking. The best things, someone is struggling. I've just said, so Dean has said, what's the best thing to do when you know someone who is struggling with depression and they say no? Well, this is not uncommon, particularly with blokes. And I think I made that point. They go, nah, I'm good. And over the years, that's probably the most common response I've had when I first said to people, are you doing okay? Yeah, fine. And actually quite abrupt, because if you think of the symptoms, they're feeling quite defensive and quite overwhelmed. So this response is not unusual. So there's a few things you can do. You can come back and say, look, I know you're saying you're fine, but I'm really worried about you because, and not in a performance management way, not in a nitpicky way, because you just don't see yourself, or you just, I'm just concerned. And if they go, yeah, no, I'm fine, come back again a few days later, or get someone else to ask them, or shoot them a text or an email. Now, younger people, I'm sounding like I'm 95. I'm really very young. I'm like 18 years old or 15-year-old, like my teenage kids. They just love this thing. So communicate in the way that that person is comfortable with. So that might be shooting them a text or an email or a snap saying, I know you said you're fine, but I am worried about you. Please touch base, and add on a link of where they can get assistance. So, and then follow up with them, because you may have spent a fair bit of time deciding and umming and ahhing whether you'll approach someone, but they didn't know you were going to do that. And they're like, whoa, back off. I'm putting every ounce of my energy into looking like I'm fine, and you're asking me how I am. And if I say yes, I'll burst into tears. So keep in mind to revisit it, I would say. So, Dean, thanks for that question. It's a really important one. So revisit. Communicate in different ways to the person, and share your concerns with another person in confidence, so there's more than one person coming at them in the nicest way.
And Taze shared that they're doing some a resilience project where.
Oh, I just saw that. Yes, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And these are going to be things you think, really, should I do this? And anyone who has ever done these things where 21 days of gratitude or the resilience program, the journaling your health, will always get to the end and say, actually, that was really good. Even halfway through, what it does is it starts to shift our lens. It's being programmed to see the negative. So when we start to do these resilient projects, we start to have to look at positive things and change our thinking to be a bit more optimistic. So rather than looking outside and go, oh, it's grey, we look outside and go, oh, I can see the sun is going to come out. So our internal conversation starts to shift, and there's lots of evidence to show that. The reason you need to do it for at least 21 days is because that's how long the pathways in our brain start to change. We do something for 2 or 3 days, it's not a habit, and it won't get kind of ingrained in our brain. So it's really nice. Thank you for sharing that. I love those ideas. And that's another great share around Australian Story on Greg last night, which I haven't watched yet, but I'm hoping to. And I think these things, back to that comment about blokes often being not that open, not that, oh yeah, get on with it, very stoic. These stories are amazing for changing people's lens on their own mental health or the mental health of other people, of just starting to get a greater empathy of the complexity of it and a greater understanding of this is a mental health condition. People get unwell, they get very unwell sometimes, and then they get well, like anything else. It's part of a journey of being human. Are you in denial if you pop a few St. John? Okay, so St. John's wort was the question. Now, St. John's wort, for those of you who aren't aware, it's a vitamin, and there has been some studies that say that it does help with mild depression. So I would say, I'm not going to say if you're in denial, Ben, I don't know. I would say if you're finding you want to use St. John's wort, that's fine, whatever. But it's probably a nice flag to go, hey, I'm also going to have a chat with my GP or a counsellor and think, why am I wanting the St. John's wort? Why am I needing it? And look, for some people, they'll swear by it and they'll take that for years and they're very high functioning and they're very well. So I'm probably not in a position to say don't or do, but it might just be worth having a check-in with a professional going, this is what I'm doing. Is there anything else I should be doing for my well-being or could be doing? A nice way to approach it. Thank you. Great questions. Any more? I love questions. It makes my day more interesting. I don't think I was in my room talking to myself all day.
Here we've got Aaron's come up with one.
Oh, great. So a circuit breaker to get through hard thoughts. Is there any way we can do this easily through the day to help with? Yes. A circuit breaker that you can just do during the day, little drop-ins, is short breathing techniques. So really just stopping what you're doing, go into the bathrooms or if you're outdoors, beautiful, and do 2 minutes of really deep, heavy breathing. So right into the belly breathing. And the minute we start doing this, it's called, I'm calling it belly breathing because it's the easiest, right in, really holding it and then exhaling it. The minute you do that, your whole nervous system slows down. It shifts. So it's a really lovely circuit breaker. And what it's nice to do is to pair your circuit breaker with something that you do relatively often. If you're younger than me, use your phone. So every time you go to do a text, before you do your text, do a couple of really deep breaths. If you drink a lot of water and go to fill up your tap often, as you're filling up your water or boiling the kettle, do a couple of really beautiful deep breaths there. The other nice circuit breaker is putting on a good song. Have a theme song and pop it in and it shifts your thoughts and it elevates your mood straight away. So that'd probably be my 2 tips. Thanks for that, Aaron. I'm sure if you, and then from the next one from Tay. Yes, I would agree with this, Tay, that sharing app groups. I've got about 5 app groups. And last year I didn't have a single app group with colleagues, with mothers groups, with uni friends. And they're so much fun and really nice if we come back to circuit breaker, sharing ideas and banter and fun. And it really makes us feel a little bit more connected with each other. And I mean, there's so many funny things to put on them at the moment as well. So thank you for sharing that one. It's a lovely tip. there anything else there?
I think.
Giving you a minute to type. I'm up for it. Keep it for the sharing ideas with each other, because I've really skimmed across the surface of things you can do with your teams, and I did this recently with a group of nurses and it was hilarious. What you can do if you are accessing a lunchroom, get people to put what one or two of their tips are on this and stick it on the wall, so as people are coming in and out can see each other's tips. I mean, some of them did put just eat 3 Mars bars, but that's, whatever it is, go home, buy the postcard, whatever. They put, they're nurses, they can be very inappropriate, but just some little tips and start a dialogue with each other and across your teams of some of the fun things that you're doing for the circuit breakers, for your well-being, to feel more connected with each other. And just get some good tips. Might even be a good recipe that someone pops up there and says, this is the best thing this week, because it makes so much. So there's lots of nice things to keep sharing ideas. So thank you for making me think of that today. Is there anything else before we wind up? I want to thank you all so much for jumping on today and putting aside an hour of your time, but especially for sharing in the dialogue and questions and chats that have been put up. And I'm glad at the end of my chat I was able to see it. So thank you all very, very much. Look, if we were doing a face-to-face session, I would invite you, if anyone had one-on-one questions, to catch me now, which obviously isn't, we're not able to do in that forum. But if you do have any questions or queries or threads that you want to follow up with me, I would encourage you, just shoot me an email in the next day or two. You can get my email address from Simone, and I'll happily get back to you, because I'm really conscious that this is a very big forum for more specific questions or concerns. So do not hesitate to do that. I welcome questions while I'm stuck in this room. In this state. Makes me feel more connected. Please bring them on. So thank you all so much. That's kind of all I needed to cover. If there's anything else?
Thanks, Liz. And a couple of guys in the chat are saying thanks as well. And I might just go back to Mark to finish off.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, and thank you, Liz. It's a little bit of irony, perhaps, in the fact that one of the key messages was staying connected, and my internet completely dropped out at the start of the session. So look, I managed to get back on, and there were some really powerful messages in there. I think one of the key points for me would be that we will be sharing this information and your slides, and there are resources available through the pack, and you've got those links there, which I think is really important for everybody, because it's certainly a complex topic that we're all dealing with and we're all learning about at the same time as we go through it. But just looking through my notes, I've got about sort of 10 to 12 points around staying connected, the positive mindset, proactive revisiting discussions. It's not just a one-off.
Absolutely, and that's what's really key.
Making sure that everybody is,
and make this PowerPoint your starting point. Pull it apart. Just use one part of it a week or a month or whatever, and just keep having the conversations. And that's what we need to keep having, and keep checking in with each other, because our situations keep changing, like by the minute, by the day. So it's, if someone's okay today, check in next week and the week after. So thanks for
exactly
that, Mark.
right. And I think there's a piece that I know that some turf managers are starting to introduce now into their workplaces around a wellbeing board.
Right.
So previously it was a communications board or an update, that maybe an EH&S with some of the information up there from EPAR and the likes of those sorts of things. But the potential to start an ideas board around wellbeing with some of the post-it notes and Mars bars that you mentioned before.
No, everyone's going to want a Mars bar after this session. Sorry.
Or 3. But also then leaning on peers for support, which is kind of the concept around what we're doing here, and bringing the conversation to the front. This won't be the end of it. There'll be more on this. There'll be more on this topic. There'll be more discussions, because it's certainly something that we're learning as we go through. But there are other people who are going through the same situation. So we've all got big networks. Let's start sharing those ideas. Let's start leaning on each other or talking to each other and staying connected. but also understanding the fact that there are resources available through the association if anybody wants to talk through further. And we'll be providing business details, and if you need to talk or want to email questions, that is available for the members as well, to be able to send them through to us, and we'll get them on.
Fantastic.
But again,
thanks
look, thank you again. Probably just interrupted you as I jumped in then, but a quick note of thanks from my perspective. It's always good to refresh yourselves on these sorts of things from time to time.
And that's it. It's often things that we all know, but we just need to have some time away from everything else to think about and talk about it. It's great.
Yeah, very true. And the more we talk about it, the more that stigma, I guess, is broken down.
Absolutely.
So please continue to chat. Please continue to talk and support each other the way through this. So. Well, that's it for today. Echoing the messages of everybody who's popped on chat. It's an ongoing focus, and thank you for your time, and thank you also for sharing. It's been a wonderful hour spent, and I think there's going to be a lot that's taken away from this. So thank you again on behalf of us and our members for your time, Liz.
Absolute pleasure. Good luck and take care, everyone. Stay safe. Great. Bye for now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.